Starting on January 1st, recreational marijuana will be legal in Illinois, making it the 11th state to legalize the substance.
Joining us to discuss where the cannabis industry is heading, how Illinois is preparing for this change, is the CEO of Revolution Ventures, Mark Souza. He served on the transition committee for Illinois Governor J.B. Pritzker and is in Washington, D.C. to meet with elected officials about cannabis legislation and social justice issues. Mark, thanks for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
So what brings you to town, Mark? You're here to meet with elected officials. What type of legislation in particular are you pushing for here?
Well, I'm not pushing for anything at this time. I think we're just trying to make the conversation be heard fairly. And, you know, coming on the heels of the U.S. Farm Bill, which we had some great support here federally, and we're working a lot on that in Illinois as well. I think, you know, there's just a lot of stuff that is really going on that's necessary for people in our positions to be here, let them know who operates businesses, how we see the world, and want to be good stewards of the industry.
How'd you get into this line of work?
Well, it's kind of a long story, but I come from a 30-plus year finance background, and when we came in as investors, we just decided that this looked a lot like an emerging industry, kind of a hybrid between manufacturing and the dot-com universe, in that it was new, and we were going to be supported legally and legislatively as states and hopefully our federal government continue to support this emerging industry, not just on the cannabis side, but also on the hemp side. And we liked that opportunity set and are looking for a lot of growth.
So, Mark, I understand why there could be lucrative growth in the marijuana industry, but part of the reason that there's been some skepticism here in Washington is we've had the Surgeon General on the show. We've had other research showing that there's teen use that's up in Colorado and other states that are legalizing marijuana. It's a couple of doctors who specialize in addiction say that, if anything, there's a link between marijuana use and a growing opioid addiction. And they're saying definitively in a recent New York Times op-ed, marijuana damages young brains. What's your industry doing in order to make sure that people who are 25 or younger are not using marijuana?
Well, and it's a great question, and I appreciate some of those data points. The first thing I would tell you is that as an industry leader, and as well with my colleagues, one of the things that we support is heavy regulation and heavy enforcement. You know, part of the issue that has to be dealt with here in keeping the public safe is, what is this being used for? Our company, which is a science-based company, we approach things first and foremost not only for patients and their needs, but consumer safety. And it is very hard for us to hear, and I would question, you know, what is the age? Is it similar to alcohol? Is it 21? I haven't heard 25 before, and I appreciate that. But, you know, it's hard for us to take a position that's any more stringent than what we would like to see from law enforcement. In Illinois, we work really hard with the Illinois State Police directly. They're one of our regulatory bodies. We work directly with the legislators in this new legislation that came to the floor and was recently signed by the governor. And keeping all of our children, as well as all our citizens, safe is very important to us.
What have we learned from the states where recreational marijuana has been legalized?
It varies. And so I think one of the things that we're hoping that we can help our federal legislators look at is the difference between open license markets like a California or limited license markets where you have stricter enforcement, less producers that are given the permission to do this. So by default, not only can they control and understand how the things are getting into the supply chain, everything from genetics and growing, but also to the consumer packaged good product that the consumer is getting and making sure that safety exists.
And is the pushback on that more limited approach basically that it favors the big guys?
Well, it depends on who you talk to. You know, I know there's a couple of wonderful nonprofit organizations, and we happen to have held ourselves out there during the Illinois push for the legislation. We do support home grow on a limited use because there's no reason why someone shouldn't be able to grow their own tomatoes. However, one of the things that has to be carefully monitored here is making sure that not only on a state level but on a federal level, we're not by default birthing a gray or black market and now causing consumer safety and health issues.
Well, part of the issue, though, is that even in the the green market, in the legal market, is that companies like yours produce very high potency products. And so the Surgeon General warned on this very program that high potency marijuana contributes to the addiction of marijuana, particularly damages young brain, that is 10 to 12 times more high potency than it was in the early days. How do you monitor for potency controls, and what kind of regulation and medical bodies are you working with? I took a look at your website. One of the things you guys sell are something like fudge, cannabis infused fudge. How is it that product cannot be used for anything but marketing towards children?
So I appreciate the question. And so it's a very, I guess, specific way that you have to understand my response. And first and foremost, every product we make, we do consumer testing, we do consumer preferences. And I would tell you, as a delivery mechanism, edibles for patients have been some of the more preferred methods of getting medicine into their system. And we're actually trying to work on some of the efficacy, even with the digestive system not being able to accept everything in that deliverable, and giving them more efficacy. But I'd like to go back and answer one of your questions specifically, in that we don't market anything specific to children.
Well, neither does Juul. Doesn't market fruit products to children, but it's overwhelmingly used by children, right?
So where I was going with that, in the regulatory environments that we actually are in, are licensed in, and compete with people that are of our size, children are not given access to the product in those stores. So I would challenge the concept that we're making products that could be consumer demanded by kids. We don't use cartoons. We don't use typical labeling that other product manufacturers have used to market to underage users. And that is something that's very important to us.
What about the potency issue?
Great. I was just about to go there, and I appreciate that. So I think one of the things, especially as we developed a company, one of the things, because we are science-based and we do practice scale with excellence, and having our eyes on genetics and where we can take the different parts of the plant to give the consumer or the patient what they actually need, I think the answer probably is that in some strains we can give better strength. But the way we answer that question, no different than any consumer manufacturing product, whether it's recreational like alcohol or pharmaceutical medication, part of that is the labeling and helping the patient understand how much they need for chronic pain, for opioid relief, which is something that we've seen a good deal of demand for. And as well, I think one of the primary things that has really given us a lot of pride in what we're helping is the large amount of veterans all over the country who are suffering horribly from PTSD and now are getting relief from a medication that doesn't harm them, gives them a chance to live normally after doing something that was so special to our country. And I appreciate being able to mention that so soon after our holiday here.
Absolutely.
Yeah. What do we know in terms of opioid addiction relief? What does the science say about how cannabis can be used in that process?
Well, you guys are asking some really great questions. And I think one of the things that we're trying to work hard on, especially in certain jurisdictions, is actually to be allowed to do more studies in partnership with academia. And we've had a lot of pushback because some of the major universities, given how the certain federal laws are written, they're kind of prevented from rolling up their sleeves.
Schedule I status, right?
Well, not just Schedule I status as one of it, but what happens behind that is it puts at risk any partnership federal funding for other things these universities are doing. And I think if we're going to do this as a country, I think we need to understand that even if it's on one-off or specialized research opportunities, we shouldn't let Europe and Israel lead the way. We should be doing that research too. America is very competitive in this space, and we'd like to see those partnerships be approved and have the chance to have them out there.
So to be clear, you think that marijuana should be legalized at the federal level?
I think it should be legalized or at least given certain permissions to be able to exist within a consumer market at medical and recreational level, no different than we see the even bigger market that there is for the hemp side of the plant. And we think that that's something we're going to try and support, but we also believe very firmly in states' rights and that the federal government should be able to support that in each jurisdiction and how they want to run their programs, and correspondingly create some really I guess, in parallel working laws that don't disadvantage anybody.
Where is your company seeing the largest growth right now?
Well, I think I would tell you it's kind of a tie. I mean, our industry is really wrapped around growth as it intersects with population density, but at the same time, we see legislation start to free up market demand. So Illinois has obviously been a really interesting market to see how that's firmed up after the legislation was put in place. At the same time, there was some parallel medical legislation that came at the same time. You know, the sponsors of both bills were amazing in trying to understand how that demand was going to increase and making sure that the market was going to be ready for that. And we are seeing the same thing in Florida. Now, I think, just before the holiday, there was some new language that they were starting to consider bringing that market into a recreational environment. And the consumer demand there is, again, with the intersection of population density, is going to be monstrous.
Well, one of the things I'm really concerned about, or I look at, is consumer protection. And so, you know, in Colorado right now with legalization, you have more recreational marijuana dispensaries than you do McDonald's in the city of Denver. That's an explosion in the market.
Yeah.
But just because that there's consumer demand doesn't mean that there shouldn't be some sort of regulation. What type of regulation do you believe should be put in place if we're going to go to a legalized environment?
Yeah, again, great question. And I think it dovetails to what we were talking about before, in that it's our company's view that limited license markets are part of the consumer protection opportunity here, and that not just, you know, verifying who's using and are they of age, but that's a perfect example of what we would actually be against. There shouldn't be more dispensaries than there are McDonald's or liquor stores, or it just isn't the right fit for how we see the responsible production and in turn supplying that to consumers in this space. We just don't agree with that.
All right. Well, very interesting, sir. Thank you for joining us.
Yeah, thanks
Thank you
so much.
for your time.
Great to meet you.
Well, more rising. We'll have more rising for you after this.